Very good.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're taking a look at the most expensive LPVO that I've reviewed to date. This is the Vector Continental 1-10 by 28. But before we get into all that, I do need to say thank you to you guys. Recently, the channel hit 50,000 subscribers, and this has been the best year so far on the channel. So I do want to just start out by saying thank you to all of you guys who have watched, commented, liked, shared, subscribed, supported throughout the years. And of course, if you're just a lurker on the channel, well, I thank you for your time as well. Now, if you're not familiar with Vector Optics, usually they're on the cheaper side. They are a Chinese manufacturer and OEM for a lot of other companies as well. They make a lot of lower end scopes, and they have a sub-brand called Victo Optics that makes extremely cheap stuff, basically airsoft price stuff. But the Continental line, their claim to fame is that it's utilizing German glass, so it's a little bit more expensive. This again is the most expensive LPVO that I've put on the channel to date, coming in at $1,000 flat. So it's definitely on the expensive side of things, especially for this channel. Now, getting into the basics of the Vector Continental 1-10 by 28 first focal plane optic. This is of course a 1-10 34mm main tube, giving us a 28mm objective, and it is of course first focal plane. Now, talking about size and weight, this comes in at a little bit on the big and heavy side, just under 11 inches long and right at 23 ounces. Now, that is not the biggest or heaviest LPVO on the market, but that is certainly in the top half. So with that as our starting point, are we getting enough performance to make up for that extra size and weight that comes with having a 34mm main tube? Moving on to controls of the optic, we have exposed locking, windage, and elevation. So they are exposed, they're not capped style turrets. However, they are locked. Simply lift to unlock, and then you can adjust to your heart's content. These are in 0.1 mil increments, which is perfect considering the reticle is also in mil. Very important to note, the top turret has 0 stop and 0 reset, as well as a rotation indicator. Now, if you don't need any of that, they actually include an extra turret in the box that does not have a 0 stop. On the left-hand side of the body, we have our illumination dial, which goes from off to 11, and very nicely it has an off in between each setting. Moving back to the magnification ring, we do have a lot of machining going on here that give you these deep grooves to adjust it. It does have a 180-degree throw from 1 to 10, and it doesn't come with a throw lever, but they do have an optional throw lever on their website, which I believe retails for about 40 bucks. And if you're going to be using it a lot, I would probably recommend picking one up. Last thing on the optic body is going to be the rear diopter for adjusting the reticle to work best with your specific set of eyes. Moving on to the usability of the scope, starting out with eye relief and eye box. Our eye relief on 1X is very similar to a lot of other LPVOs. You have a extensive range which your eye can be in at 1X, anywhere from like 3 to 7 inches, and you're going to get a decent sight picture through it. It gets very tight at the top end of 10X, where you need to be right at about 3.5 to 4 inches to get a full sight picture. Now, the eye box is pretty good, especially at 1X. You have a good amount of left, right, up and down variation where you can be not necessarily perfectly behind the optic and still get a good sight picture, meaning that the optic is very usable at 1X. Now, keep in mind that this is a 1-10, and as you move up the magnification range, it does tighten up quite a bit in terms of its eye relief and eye box. Now, with the 28mm objective, you do get a little bit more forgiving, about 15% more forgiving than a 1-10 off of a 30mm main tube, because of course you move from a 24mm objective to a 28mm objective, so you are going to have a little bit more forgiving of an exit pupil, which means that this is better than a lot of other scopes at 10x, but certainly not the best. Something with a 40+ mm objective is going to be considerably more forgiving at that top end. That's not to say that it's unusable at the high end, but just keep in mind that if you're at 10x magnification, you're going to need to be a little bit more precise with your head location. Getting into field of view at 1x at 100 yards, you have a phenomenal 123-foot field of view, which is very good. Again, as I say in most of my LPVO videos, it's nice to have a big field of view at 1x, but where it really matters is throughout the entire magnification range, especially in this option, all the way up to 10x magnification, meaning that you get more field of view, more information at each magnification. Now getting into the reticle, which is going to be a plus and one of my complaints with the optic. Now the Vector Continental 1-10 has two different reticle options. You have the VET RAR or the VET RAR and the VET CTR. The VET CTR forgoes the outer ring at 1x and exchanges it for a 1x1 mil grid Christmas tree all the way out to 12 mils. Now what this means is that it is much less usable at 1x, but gives you a lot more information at distance. The VET RAR, which is the one that I currently have, has the outer circle at 1x that of course gets bigger until it eventually disappears from your field of view. However, it does not have any sort of mill holds for your wind. It does of course have your mill drops in a straight line below the target, but it forgoes your Christmas tree. My main complaint is that there shouldn't be two reticle options, there should just be the one that has the 1x circle and also the mill Christmas tree. It might be a little bit more complex and a little bit more expensive to do it all in one reticle, but that is the best of both worlds instead of a compromise. So the option that I have is much better at 1x, very easy to pick up the reticle with that big outer circle, but when you're at 10x magnification, taking shots at say 5, 6, 700 yards, you aren't going to have any wind holds. Now a caveat to that is that it does of course include a exposed windage turret that you can simply dial your wind. However, personally, if I'm trying to shoot out to say unknown distances, but let's say beyond 600 yards, and I spot my miss, I would much rather just use the reticle quickly than estimate what I'm dialing. So again, the option that I have is the VET RAR, which does very well at 1x magnification with that bigger outer circle, because that does work for fast acquisition, because again, this is a 1-10 first focal plane, so at 1x magnification, that reticle is very small. Now at 10x magnification, it is still fairly precise and very easy to use. However, again, it's just missing those wind holds that the other option has. So really, they just need to combine them together, and then I wouldn't have anything to complain about. Now, in terms of the illumination on the reticle, it is not very bright. It's all right, but certainly not daylight bright by any means. In certain scenarios, if you need that contrast, it can help, or in low light scenarios, indoors, anything like that. The illumination is certainly enough for those sort of scenarios. However, in direct sunlight, it's more of a slightly tinted reticle. But even if the illumination isn't great, with that outer circle, you can still put it on target and use the very precise center aiming point, because it does get very small at 1x, to make more precise shots if you need. It does definitely take a little bit of getting used to, but over the last couple months and several thousand rounds later, I am very comfortable with the way the reticle works at 1x. Now all of that brings us to the glass quality. Now this is going to be one of the more difficult aspects of the scope to explain properly. Now the Continental line's claim to fame is that it is a Chinese body using German glass, boasting a 93% light transmission, which is actually very high. Now keep in mind that objectively comparing glass through different cameras, editing software, whatever screen that you happen to have at home, is a very difficult task to get right. So what I can say is, for my human eyes, is that it does look very good. Probably not quite as good as Steiner glass, however, much better than your basic Chinese glass. On the same day that I was taking this out for its last range session, I was also using the SIG MSR 1-6, which is a $300 Chinese scope, and that started to get muddy around 300 to 400 yards. The target started to get a little bit blurry, and the Continental 1-10, with additional magnification, maintained a much higher level of optical clarity even at a higher magnification range, meaning that you get a lot more detail on target, meaning that it's going to be easier to pick up low contrast targets, smaller targets, unknown size targets, so on and so forth. The glass just looks better at every magnification. Now that's the raw glass quality. When talking about how the image actually looks, at 1x we have a very flat, relatively distortion-free image, meaning that it does look fairly true to life. It's not a perfect 1x, there's no such thing as a perfect 1x through 20 panes of curved glass inside of an LPVO, but it does look very good, and if you're used to using an LPVO, I think you're going to have a good time with it. And when we combine all that together, we have a good glass quality, as well as the image looks very true to life. Almost no distortion edge to edge, no chromatic aberration that I've noticed whatsoever. Combining that with good usability, good eye relief and eye box on the low end, and usable at the top end. And again, the main downside that I have when it comes to actually looking through the optic is that at higher magnifications, I would prefer to have the mill grid Christmas tree, and at lower magnifications, I greatly appreciate the fact that they have the outer circle, so they just need to come out with a new version that has both reticles combined. So now we can talk about how it is actually using it when it's mounted to a rifle. Again, as I mentioned earlier, at 1x you do have that outer circle which really draws your eye to the center. However, the center actual aiming point is very, very small, so it does take a little bit of getting used to. Fortunately, at this point, I have gotten used to it. Now, the illumination again is another area that could help you at 1x, but unfortunately it's a little dimmer than what I would like. Overall, the reticle is still very good at all magnification levels. Just at the top end, it kind of falls off a little bit without the extra information that you would get from a 1x1 mill grid. Even with that valid complaint there, I still have taken this out to 600 yards on multiple guns on multiple occasions, and even without wind holds, it's still easy to do. But again, if you wanted to take it further, especially on 5.56, having wind holds is a nice feature to have. Now, if you're mounting it on something like a 6.5 Grendel, which I've mounted it on, wind doesn't matter all that much, but again, it would be nice because I think most people are probably buying it for a 5.56. This could, in theory, be the ultimate do-everything scope, because again, you could use it from 0 to 1,000 yards, basically, but keep in mind that you do have a size, weight, and, in this case, cost penalty. And this being Vector's first shot at a true high-end 1 to 10, they did a pretty good job, but they could improve in a couple areas. Now, quickly touching on durability, again, I've had this for a couple months, put over 2,000 rounds through it, different calibers, and I did do my standard double drop test on it. Now, starting off with a control group at 50 yards, this was using a Roscoe 13.7 Purebred, which is a fantastically accurate rifle, and we're just using some M855. I believe we put up a 5-round control group to give us a good reference point. Now, after that, we do a shoulder height drop onto the frozen tundra here in South Dakota, and we got no point of impact shift whatsoever. The second drop is also shoulder height, but this time on an AR-500 steel plate, which is a unrealistically hard drop, and in theory the hardest drop an optic could ever encounter. And after the drop onto the AR-500 steel plate, we got a point of impact shift straight up about 6 inches. Now, I'm actually going to blame this on the mount a little bit. This is the Primary Arms GLX 34mm mount, which is just a rebranded worn mount, which has a pretty thin cantilever section. And the fact that it bent straight up kind of makes me think that the mount crushed down a little bit, therefore increasing my elevation and making it appear as if zero had shifted straight up. I have had a very similar result in a different Primary Arms GLX 34mm mount on a different optic, which kind of leads me to believe that it has something to do with the mount, and I probably should have bought a more expensive mount for a more expensive optic. And it should be noted that the optic itself is perfectly fine. There was absolutely no loss of function. The top turret was scuffed up, but other than that, perfectly fine. If I didn't mention it, on the Continental line, the turrets themselves are actually 70-75 versus 60-61, so they actually do have some improved durability there. And right after the double drop test, I took it out to 450 yards. So again, it has absolutely no issues with the scope itself, just the point of impact shift, which I'm leaning towards the fact that it was more on the mount side of things than on the actual optic side of things. Now, when we get into the value discussion, this is a very interesting market segment. There's really only one other analog to the Vector Continental 1 to 10, and that is going to be the Voodoo 1 to 10 by 28, specifically with the SR5 reticle, because the SR4 reticle is basically identical to this one. Vector basically copied and pasted the EOTech Voodoo formula, and for good reason. It works quite well. The Voodoo 1 to 10 has a very similar size and weight. I want to say it's about 1.5 ounces lighter, maybe a little bit shorter, has a slightly lower field of view, slightly tighter eye relief, and the Vector Continental is $700 cheaper. Now, neither of these are cheap optics. The EOTech Voodoo is a Japanese optic, the Vector Continental is a Chinese/German optic, so comparing them side to side, which I don't have one side by side here, is very difficult to do, but again, that's really the only other analog for this style of optic on the market. So again, if we're only comparing it to the EOTech Voodoo, I think it does represent a good value because it is, again, $600-700 cheaper. However, when we compare it to everything else in the market currently for how it performs at distance, how it performs up close, I think it's in a pretty tough segment, because it's also going to be competing with things like the PLXC 1-8 from Primary Arms and several other very nice LPVOs. The Night Force and LPVOs are going to be in there, and name a bunch of others as well in that $1,000 plus category. So it has a lot of very tough competition. And while it might not be the most expensive option when compared to some of its competitors, it is going to be very expensive when compared to the rest of Vector's lineup. So for a flat $900, is this a good buy? That's going to be a solid maybe for me. If you're only comparing against the Voodoo 1-10, then it might be a very good buy. But when you're comparing it again to the rest of the market, then it becomes a little bit harder of a sell. So it is a very good optic, it's very useful, and again, anywhere from really 0 to about 800 yards, but it's certainly not for everyone. But that's about all that I have on the Vector Continental 1-10x28. Certainly an interesting option in the market. But with all of that out of the way, guys, once again, I do need to say thank you to all of you for watching the video this far. And again, thank you for the best year that I've had on YouTube so far. With all of that out of the way, gentlemen, thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. God bless.